Well, there we go. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Safety Artisan webinar. It's good to be with you. I did this morning. This morning I live in Australia, so this morning I was on at 7:30 in the morning, but for some reason the video just didn't record. So a bit disappointed about that, I have to say, but never mind. That's what happens. But here we are, and it's now 5:30 in the afternoon. And so it will be, what will it be? Late evening in the UK, middle-ish of the day in India. So whoever we've got with us today, whether you're on Restream or whether you're on via Eventbrite or Facebook or YouTube or whatever, welcome. So today we're going to be talking about foundations of system safety assessment. So what we're doing is foundations of system safety. And as it says, it's a free webinar from myself, from the Safety Artisan, and it's one of a series, as we'll see. So before we go on, just introduce myself. Why should you bother to listen to me? Well, 25 years of experience in system safety. I've worked on a lot of different stuff. Aircraft, so fast jets, big aircraft, helicopters, reconnaissance and EW platforms. So I've worked on surface ships and submarines, all safety projects, by the way. Air traffic management systems, a little bit of trains and road vehicles, but not a great deal. And lots of software, because software in everything these days. So there we go, just checking where I think that was some more people joining us. So welcome. And I've worked on some nice little programs, which is great. That's always good fun. And some ginormous programs, not all of which succeeded. And so you get a range of perspectives from me on that, and you get to learn from other people's mistakes, which Bismarck said was a good idea, because we don't have time to make all mistakes in one lifetime. And I've worked in the UK for many years, and now 10 years in Australia, and I've worked on introducing a lot of US and European programs to those countries. So wide range of experience, and I've had the privilege of teaching safety to hundreds of people in the classroom and thousands online, which is terrific. And I've also been lucky enough to present on safety topics at several international conferences. So that is me. Anyway, but the proof of the pudding is in the eating, as they say. So let's get on with it, and you can see, what we've got today. So the webinar topic is foundations of system safety. So what are they, and how do we set them up for a successful project? That's what we want. So first of all, it might seem an obvious thing to say, but what do we mean by safe? But I think it's worth saying, because I've worked on so many projects where they didn't have a clear idea of what they were trying to achieve. They didn't really have a definition of what safe was. They had some vague ideas. And the trouble is, some ancient Greek bloke said, if you don't know which port you're going to, then no wind is favorable. So if we don't know where we're going, how do we know which direction to go in? And how will we know if we've got there? So we need something like this definition that is testable to help us decide what we're doing and whether we've got there or not. And it comes from an old UK standard, but don't worry about that. That's not important. So there's three key elements here. There's risk, there's requirements, and there's defining what we're doing. So first of all, we want to reduce risk in general. And in this definition, we've got a couple of targets. We've got the reducing risk so far as is reasonably practicable, or SFARP, or in the UK, we would say a LARP, or a nuclear, we would say a LARA, or a FARP, I think, in other jurisdictions. Anyway, so that's a kind of a variable target where we say, yeah, we've done enough. And then there may be an absolute target as well that says you've got to get the risk below this level, bang, hard ceiling. And where you are, you'll have to look up what the targets are in your jurisdiction, okay, if there are any. So that's risk. Then requirements. Sometimes we have, again, prescriptive or hard requirements that say you must do this if you're managing this kind of hazard or risk, okay, or you must not do that as a regulation. So we just got to obey those, okay. There's not a lot of excuse me, there's not a lot of opportunity to move on that, so we just got to get on with it. And then the third bit, which is very, very important, is actually defining what is our system, what are we doing with it, what's the use or role or application, and what is the operating environment. And these things tend to tie quite closely together. And because, you know, let's take an example. Cars are designed to work on roads, or, you know, some are designed to work on dirt tracks, but let's say ordinary cars are designed to work on roads, and that is their operating environment. So yeah, drive it on roads is the environment. Great. Generally speaking, cars work pretty well on roads. Put them in water and they work very badly indeed, and, you know, the people inside them can die very quickly. So a bit of a facetious example, but that, you know, nailing these things down really does help a project to succeed. And on the one hand, I've seen lots of projects that haven't nailed these things down and then they struggle. And on the other, when you do nail these things down, it instantly becomes easier to get there because you know where you're going. Okay. And as it says, the takeaway message is getting these foundations right from the beginning is vital. So let's move on. So we're going to look at identifying and analyzing hazards, not just functional hazards, any kind of hazard. And we're working on a model where we've got many causes can lead to one hazard, and one hazard can lead to many consequences. Okay, and it's often known as a bow tie model. And so once the hazard is present, let's say, you know, a joke, a banana skin, or, you know, an oil spill on the pavement, then an accident is possible. Okay, doesn't mean the accident will happen. Maybe nobody will tread on the oil patch, or maybe even somebody does and they slip. Maybe they recover themselves and they don't get hurt. Nobody gets hurt. So this could be a variety of consequences, but the hazard has to be there in order for the accident to occur. Okay, but it's not inevitable. So first of all, we start off with our first task, which is preliminary hazard identification. Now, the purpose of that, as it says, to identify hazards, and that's mostly what you will do. But at the beginning, you'll also identify causes and consequences, okay? That's inevitable. Sometimes at the beginning, you're not quite sure where the hazard is, because this bow tie model can be a bit of a sliding scale, and different people will put the hazard in different places, okay? So you'll discover a range of things and you'll record them. Maybe they will change downstream once you've got the benefit of more knowledge, but you've got to start somewhere. So that's your PHI. Then we can imagine that enables us to do some requirements analysis, because once we've identified some hazards, immediately certain hazards will trigger certain rules and regulations and laws that say you've got to do this about these risks and these hazards. And maybe those regulations will specify what kind of controls we must add. And then we must, I mean, there's more to requirements analysis, and that we'll come on to that later. And then we need to do some preliminary hazard analysis. So at this stage, it's going to be fairly crude and simple. And all we're doing is talking about getting an assessment of how big the risk is. So what's the likelihood, what's the severity in big handfuls? So what are the big risks that are really going to drive us? What are the little ones we're not quite so worried about? And then finally, and then maybe this is beyond this preliminary stage, we're going to come up with some controls, okay? And here I've represented the controls as imperfect barriers. So they're barriers with holes in. They're attempting to stop the progression of from cause to hazard to accident. Okay, but no control is perfect. So there's an overall picture of what we're going to be doing. When I was thinking, a picture is very helpful to give us an overview. So we've got these three things we're going to do. We've got our preliminary hazard identification, analysis, and system requirements hazard analysis. So we start off with our PHI, and as I've said, primarily we're going to identify hazards, but also causes and consequences. And we're going to look at it and go, oh, well, the obvious control for this hazard is this. Okay, so that's fine. We're going to do that too. And we're going to do some PHA. And as I've said, we'll identify risks, which will help us prioritize. And of course, doing the PHI and the PHA will help us to identify some requirements and maybe some controls as well. And then finally, we're going to use all that information to feed into our SRHA, where we're going to identify all the different kinds of requirements we need to think about. Some of those are going to be controls. The SRHA maybe is going to identify some strategies which we need to use. More about that later. And some hazards as well, because there may be, as we introduce controls and certain strategies, that in itself may introduce further hazards. So an example I gave this morning, we might decide something's very risky. We need to keep people at a distance from it, but we still want to control the thing. So that means we've got to have some kind of remote control mechanism, which in itself could introduce further hazards. More complexity, more ways for things to go wrong. So there's that overview again from a different point of view, a different representation. So I hope the two together you will find helpful. So we need to look at both physical and functional hazards. And physical hazards, kind of stuff we're familiar with in the real world, energy and toxicity, basically. So common energy hazards, fire, electric shock, falling from height or things fall on you, so potential energy because things are up high, or kinetic energy, something hits you like a car or hits somebody. And then on the toxicity side, chemicals, biological, viruses and bacteria, and sort of smoke and gases, asphyxiants and things that can, clog up our lungs. So, and most of these things, we watch the news, we've seen all of these things, haven't we, 1,000 times. So we're pretty good at that kind of stuff. What we're not so good at is functional hazards, because these are, we want the system to do certain things. What happens when it goes wrong? And these things can be intangible. So the obvious one is we want our system to do something. We want our car to go, but it doesn't. Just doesn't start, doesn't move. Yeah, that's fairly obvious. But also, what about if what if something works when it shouldn't? What if we've parked the car, but it rolls away downhill? That's obviously bad. That's not good. Or the thing works, but it works incorrectly. So, the car is moving. That's what we wanted, but maybe it's in reverse rather than going forward, or maybe it's steering off to the left or the right when we didn't want it to. Again, that can be bad. So nice simple example I've noticed on many, many projects. People are good. They're good at the physical hazards. They're reasonably good at the other thing doesn't work. They're not very good at all at the thinking that works when it shouldn't and works incorrectly. But those failure modes are often the most dangerous. So we need to think widely about hazards. So let's move on a bit. Yeah, sorry about the gratuitous picture of me, but I couldn't help it. So requirements hazard analysis. So there's two things. The first thing, which again, most people get, is we need to identify safety requirements. So there's going to be law, there's going to be regulations, we might have codes of practice, we might also have national and international standards, we might have industry good practice, all sorts of things that we might have. We might just have company policy. This is the way we do things around here, or culture. So we identify these requirements, and it's fairly obvious if it's got safety in the title or hazard or whatever, that's a safety requirement. But there is a whole other series of requirements that maybe don't have safety in the title at all. So we've got customer requirements, and I say customer, it's the requirements for the system, what we want the system to do. So we've talked about the functions of the system and how they can go wrong. So functional failure analysis, those three modes I talked about on the last slide, they can help us identify safety-related functions and also functions that cannot have any safety impact. And it's valuable to know which is which. So clearly, if we've done this analysis, we've got some justification for saying, right, all of these things don't have any impact on safety. These do. So this is what we're going to concentrate on. And also maybe the system requirements actually contain things that are hazard controls, because the customer has said, oh, you know, from previous experience, we know that this could be a problem, so we want you to do X, Y, Z. So, okay, great, that's a control. And because it's a customer requirement, it's going to get verified to make sure we get paid. So that's great. So in safety, we can be fairly confident that those customer requirements are going to get met, or they're at least going to get tracked and verified. So we can make use of that and reduce our own workload. And then finally, there may be requirements like that that need further unpacking. So maybe the customer says, oh, you know, I want you to go through a certification process to demonstrate that your vehicle is roadworthy, your ship is seaworthy, or your aircraft is airworthy, or whatever, or your nuclear reactor, or your handling something that needs a license. So you've got to go through some sort of complex process to get approvals to do that. And so those requirements, there may be a one-liner that just says you've got to do this, but you're going to have to unpack it a lot and maybe negotiate with the customer exactly how you're going to do that. What are the detailed requirements and how you're going to verify them? So it might be a one-liner, but there can be a world of pain implied by some of these requirements. Okay, so if we do the system requirements hazard analysis thoroughly, we're going to save ourselves from a lot of unpleasant surprises later down the track. Okay, and it's really important to do these things. So sorry to labor that a bit, but as you can probably tell, I've been on a lot of projects where we've been bitten badly by things that we've missed. So next steps, what we have, I have some free resources for you if you want to take this stuff further. So, and I've put the links in the chat. So there's a free preliminary hazard identification and analysis guide. There's a video demonstration of me showing you how to do a functional failure analysis. That's from the webinar last month. There's a little course called Risk Management 101, and as it implies, this really unpacks the very, very most basic concepts of risk management and puts them all together. They're all free. There's also a foundations course, which I've put together. So it's a mini course with 4 videos covering the 3 topics that I've just been talking about, the 3 tasks, plus one that talks about how we wrap it all together. Okay, and that's available for a 60% discount for another week. And again, the link is in there, so go and take a look at that if you're interested. And finally, if you would like to subscribe for free to my website, you'll get free regular emails with content and more discounts. Okay, so that's all in there and it's in the chat. Now, if you're dialing in from certain platforms, sorry, dialing in, I've just aged myself there, then you may not be able to see the chat. If you can't, then send me a message, okay, on Facebook or YouTube or whatever, or send me an email at admin@safetyartisan.com. That's admin@safetyartisan.com, and I will send you the links. So there's some resources to take you further. Or you can just go to the website, safetyartisan.com. There's lots of stuff there. A lot of it is free. So enjoy. So this is the second in a series of webinars. once we've laid the foundations, of course, we don't stop there. We need to keep on going and continue with our program. So what we're going to do, looking ahead, in May, we're going to look at functional hazards in more depth. So that's looking at software and how do we manage risks with software. And then we'll be talking about workplace hazard analysis. So typically health hazard analysis and operating and support hazard analysis. And then finally, we'll be talking about hazard analysis within a systems engineering framework. Now, you see these tasks that I've mentioned on the screen. These are all tasks from MIL Standard 882E. Now, that MIL standard, it doesn't matter which standard you're using. I mean, I discuss other standards as well. But 882, it was designed to sit within a systems engineering framework. And those last ones really is where we're talking about the subsystem, system, and system of systems hazard analysis, where we're looking at the designs of our systems and how they interact. So that's where we're really getting into the systems engineering stuff. Okay, but they all fit together. They're all in a series, and you'll be able to get access to them all. Fingers crossed the video recording has worked today. So next month, we're going to look at functional hazards. So we start off thinking about what's the severity of, what could the software or firmware contribute to accident-wise? How bad is it? And then how much control are we giving the software? How much reliance are we placing on the software for safety? And it could range all the way from, most demanding case, it's autonomous. The software just goes off and does its own thing, like an unstable aircraft that's got to be computer controlled, right through to no safety impact whatsoever. So there's a range of things that we can assess on there. And that helps us to generate our software control category. And then we put that together with the severity, and that gives us our software criticality index. Well, that's how it works in MIL Standard 882E. I'll also talk about other things like the functional safety, the IEC 61508 family, whole family of standards derived from that, and others. There's plenty of standards out there. So we'll talk about that next month. So now we're going to move to a Q&A session, and this is this is an opportunity to you can ask any questions you want about what we've just been talking about, or indeed if you've got any other topic you want to discuss, please go ahead. Now, some of you will be able to talk to me, some will have to send me a message. So go ahead, please. Anybody got any questions? I see we've got quite a few people on this afternoon, which is lovely to see. So while you are typing away, hopefully, just a little reminder, here are the links to the goodies are displayed in the chat. As I say, if you can't see the chat, send me a message. So does anybody have any questions? Or if you don't want to share your questions, you can also always go to the website and send me a message, which is private, or you can leave a comment if you've got something you've thought of later. So yeah, everyone. Well, if nobody has any questions, it just remains for me to say thanks very much for joining in, and I hope you found this afternoon's session useful.